last. If they took live animals, you'd eat them because they'd eat up all the other supplies. So pretty well you're down to this. You're also on board, you're not drinking water because the fresh water won't last. It'll either be used up quickly or lack of care, it's going to go bad. So they had small beer, 2.5%. Not terribly alcoholic, but enough that it's going to keep the bacteria and stuff out. It's going to be good to drink. And everybody on board, men, women, and children, had a supply of small beer as the beverage for the voyage. Now, that's the background. Let's get up to July 25th, 1609. They have been at sea for some weeks now on their way to Jamestown. And as they're preparing for the night, the wind has come up, the waves are getting higher, the sea is getting rocky, and they prepare for what they think is an ordinary storm at sea. They have caught the edge of a hurricane. And the hurricane will separate the fleet. It will scatter the vessels so that for a long time nobody knows what happened to anybody else. Admiral Sir George Somers will go to the poop deck. La poupe in French means stern, the stern of the ship, the highest part of the ship. And he will go up here and position himself for the length of the storm. It's going to be 3 days. So that he can give directions to the helmsman, to the steersman, who is down underneath, manning the tiller, as illustrated by this. And he will holler down directions to the person who's working the steerage of the ship. This is Hurricane Danielle from 1996. You can see it's already past Bermuda. B is Bermuda, and it's heading for the coast. The hurricane that affects our story, that catches the Sea Venture and the other ships, were on this side of Bermuda. They're catching the outside winds initially, but as the hurricane continues, they're going to get caught up in the actual hurricane. And it starts July 25th, 1609. And there's two ways that you can attack a hurricane in those days. One, you would spoon a fore, which means you put the sails down and let the storm just push you wherever it will. You can have some steerage, some control. You have a risk of the waves no matter what. But this is one way to approach being caught in a hurricane. The other way is called weather coil. Now you're looking at the poop deck here, the highest part of the ship. What they would do is they would turn the ship around so that the wind is no longer hitting here, the whole high deck, because it makes the ship very difficult to steer. But if we could see from this side, it will hit this part, and they would use that as a sail. It was another method. You have spoon-a-fore, you have weather coil, and there was arguments which way. Admiral Sir George Somers does the spoon-a-fore technique and stays on post so they can steer and guide and keep heading into the waves so they're not going to be swamped by it. Early the next morning, they go down into the hold of the ship, and it's beginning to fill with water. Sea Venture's on her own. The rest of them are gone. They let the ketch loose that they were towing behind because they couldn't get the people on board, and they knew tied up they wouldn't be able to survive. So they make signals. They let her go. And that ship and those 30 people on board are never heard from again. But they go down into the hold. They find it's filling up with water. What's happening is the oakum, the fiber that's put in between the boards to seal the cracks, is coming out. This is the first voyage of the Sea Venture. It hasn't had a chance to do much testing before they set sail. And the pitch and the oakum are not working together. The oakum is coming out. Oakum is This pile of fiber here, it's reclaimed, recycled rope. It was typically produced in workhouses. You can see the people at work, they're holding old rope that they're unwinding so they can be rewound to make the oakum, which is the insulation or the part that seals the ship. It's coming loose. If they had dried meat, they would stuff that in the cracks, because the water will get in. It'll cause the meat to swell, and that'll help stop it. But where the problem is, they can't get to it because they found it too late, and it's filling up. And so what happens is they have to pump and bail. And the figures I'm going to show you here are absolutely incredible. But this keeps, I'm going to give away the end of the story, this keeps the Sea Venture afloat. 1,000 strokes an hour, one every 3 seconds. 1,200 buckets an hour, each holding 6 to 8 gallons, weighing 50 to 70 pounds. One bucket every 9 seconds, dipped up, passed along, thrown overboard. Pumpers and bailers removed 6,400 gallons of water each hour out of the ship. 500,000 gallons of water during the storm. And 100 men working day and night, continually pumping to keep the ship afloat. They'd work in 1 or 2 hour shifts. You can imagine the manual labor, the strain, the work to bail out this water. So 1 or 2 hours is all they would allow them to work. And this is an actual pump from a contemporary vessel. This is where the water would pump up. This is the mechanism that works it. And 1,000 strokes an hour on that. I just can't imagine that. But they did that to survive, and survive they did. A quote now from Antonio in the Tempest. We were all sea swallowed. This is going on now day after day for 3 days. Day and night they're being pounded by this hurricane. And finally, on the 4th morning, Strachey is writing in the journal. He's the journalist for the venture. There had been a general determination to have shut up the hatches and, commending our sinful souls to God, commit the ship to the mercy of the sea. They said, we've done all we can do. We're just going to trust God will either get us through or we'll go on to glory. But up on the poop deck, Admiral Summers, when the ship gets high on the wave, he looks out and thinks he sees trees. And the ship goes back down. He's got to wait till it comes back up. And yes, there are trees. And he's familiar enough with the geography to think that's Bermuda. There are no settlers on Bermuda. There's no natives on Bermuda. Nobody has lived on Bermuda. It's just this beautiful island out in the Atlantic Ocean. And as they get closer, he knows that the depth of the ship, the keel of the ship, must have 15 feet of water. Well, it will sound 15 feet. It's got to have 16 feet of water to stay floating. Otherwise, it runs ashore. So when they get to about 24 feet, he's looking for a way to keep the ship safe. They use these sounding leads and lead lines to figure out how deep the water is under them. Here's a, whoops, wrong button. Here's an actual lead line, and it would slide through the fingers of the navigator, and there would be 1 fathom, 2 fathoms, etc. At night, they would use one like this. It has different colors, so you could judge, even though it was dark, where you are. They might have different shapes in between, and they'd call out Mark 1, Mark Twain, and that's how Samuel Longhorn Clemens got his nom de plume, from Mark Twain, from marking the depth on the Mississippi River. And when they get to about 24 feet, they look for a place to somehow stabilize the ship. This painting is by J.W. Woodhouse. It's called Miranda. She is looking out at a ship that has reached a point that it's not going to go any further. Summers finds a place where he can ground the ship. Because if he can ground it, the ship will stay upright. They can use the survival craft, the longboats, to get people ashore. If not, the thing's going to tip over, and the 153 people on board the Sea Venture are going to drown, or most of them will. And it may be an overused word, it may be a misused word, but the survival of these folks, in my opinion, is nothing less than a miracle, because he finds the one spot coming into Bermuda where he comes in, and I'll show you where they're coming in. They're coming in right here. This is where they're going to land. This is St. George's province. They're going to land right here, and they stick out about here. He finds the only place where he can get a ship that size through and to lodge it, to keep it upright. They find that spot. The ship is safe. They'll get everybody ashore. They'll get everybody onto dry land. This is called today Gates Bay, after the governor that was on board. And it is now July 28th, 1609. And this is, if you've been to Bermuda, you've seen this. This is looking from the back towards the beach where they're landing. This is what they had to deal with on the other side, these rocks and so forth. And here's the beach again with Fort St. Catherine, and this is where they actually landed. Here's what it looks like today through the miracle of Photoshop. This is what it looked like then, and this is their target, this little bit of white sandy beach. If you've been to Bermuda, that piece is barely as long from the back of the chancel to the front doors. That's the target. And they land there. They're safe, but nobody in the world knew where they were. Let me show you. Here's London, from whence they sailed. Here's Jamestown, that was the target. About 600 miles away is Bermuda. They're safe, but nobody in the world knows where they are. The little ketch I told you was lost. The other ships miraculously make it to Jamestown. And they don't have any idea where the Sea Venture is. She's lost. That's logical. The storm they were in. Or she survived and turned around and went back to London. But nobody knows where they are. And here they are on a blessed piece of solid ground. You Latin students will recognize Quo fata fuerunt. Whither the fates will lead is a rough translation. That's the motto of Bermuda. And it's based on this story that I'm telling you, this episode. You see the British Lion on top. You see a ship in a storm. That's the Sea Venture. This is the crest. This is the coat of arms of Bermuda here into the 21st century. And it goes back to 1609 when the Sea Venture landed, as close as they could, when the Sea Venture landed in that area. Now, they will begin to organize parties. This is a fellow who's a reenactor in period costume with period weapons. They'll have some hunters. They'll have some fishermen. This is a fishing weir similar to one that they would have set up with the gate here so the fish could come in and then couldn't find their way out, or they could close the gate. But initially, they organized a fishing party, and if I can remember it till tomorrow, and somebody remind me, I want to tell you the story of the Russian fishermen, if I don't remember it. Fishermen tell stories all the time. Fish gets getting bigger, bigger, bigger. They put in the journal that within 30 minutes, there were so many fish there in the waters off of Gates Bay that they collected enough to feed the whole company in 30 minutes. Now, if you're a fisherman, you may have told once or twice. Strachey wrote this in his journal, that within 30 minutes, They collected enough fish to feed 153 people. Pretty good fishing and a lot of fish. One thing else that helps them to survive in the early days, there's a herd of wild hogs on the island. Juan Bermudez, a Spanish sailor, Spanish captain, went by the island in 1515 and put ashore wild hogs. I guess they were tamed then. Male and female. Put them ashore, and he said, in case somebody lands here, is shipwrecked here, there'll be something for them to survive on. 1515. Well, it's 1609. He missed it by a few years. But now these people from the Sea Venture have fish. They have whatever harvestable plants they have. They had seeds that were on board the ship that they saved. And they have these hogs. Here is a replica that's in the Bermuda Museum. He's the only one left on Bermuda, or else on the coins, because they ate them all. They were not afraid of the humans. They'd gather them up, they'd put them into corrals or pens when they needed one for bacon for breakfast, that they would harvest them, and they ate them all. There's no more. But these kept them alive in the early days till they can do foraging, till they can set up, plant some stuff, grow some crops. And then they start a construction project. They have salvaged from the Sea Venture all of the lumber that they can. And because of where Summers ran the ship aground, they can get almost all of it. And they harvest the natural cedar that was there. And they begin constructing crafts. They do make one log craft, but beyond that they will make 2 vessels which they'll put back to sea. This is a model of the Discovery, which was the largest of the 2. It's up in St. George's, and if you haven't seen it, next time you're in Bermuda, go up to St. George's, pay $1, it's all it costs, get on board, see this vessel that we could put right here in the sanctuary, and it wouldn't bump the sides. And here's the passenger compartment. I'm, depending on who's measuring me, I'm 5'7" or 5'8". It's about up to here on me, so you couldn't have stood up in it. You'd had to crawl, sat down, or laid down. But they build this ship and another ship. They're going to complete the mission to Jamestown. They were sent to go to Jamestown. They're going to go to Jamestown. And as they are working, they move from the place where home was now, up at Gates Bay. They move down here to Building Bay so that it has a better avenue, a better angle to get out into the ocean. If you've sailed into Bermuda, you've seen the rocks and all that are along. You know you have to have a pilot on board the cruise ship to direct you through that. They've figured out that this is the best place from which to launch a vessel, so they build 2 craft right down there. Now life goes on Bermuda. They're there almost a year. There's a single man by the name of Thomas Powell, a single lady by the name of Elizabeth Persons, and they cast eyes upon one another. A relationship begins, and they're planning marriage. The custom of the day, one of the strangest things, you may have heard of bundling. They would take the man and the woman and they would wrap them up so they can't get loose and be naughty, and they'd put them in a bed and they'd watch them all night long. And this was part of the marriage ritual, part of the marriage ceremony, part of the counseling. And they survive this. They do get married. They have a wedding, and the wedding is officiated by the chaplain who was on board, Reverend Richard Buck. And the bride wears a wreath of flowers in her hair and a coin in her shoe. I don't know if it was a 6 or not. May have been. For good luck, they kissed over the bridal cake. And instead of throwing her garter, the bride took off and threw one of her stockings at the end of the ceremony. Also on board was a married couple Jane and John Rolfe. Jane was pregnant when they landed. She will give birth to a son. They'll name him Bermuda. The lad does not live long, but he was the first person to be born on Bermuda. Now they had rules. I'm sure here in the Penny Farms community you have rules. They had rules. One was mandatory church attendance. You show up on Sunday morning to church. And not just Sunday morning. There's 2 sermons every Sunday. There's Sunday morning, Sunday night. It's mandatory. You go to church. There are morning and evening prayers every day, and you're required to come to morning and evening prayers every day. And they took attendance. And there was punishment for the non-attendees. Strachey doesn't tell us what the punishment was. I wish I knew. I'm sure if you didn't come to prayer meeting, it was a lighter punishment than if you didn't come to church. But it was a very disciplined and regulated society, and it will become a successful colony. Now, another quote, this time from Stefano in the Tempest. I do begin to have bloody thoughts. All is not hunky-dory, as I have portrayed it to you. There are difficulties. There are attempted mutinies. There are some strikes. And one thing that happens, a man by the name of Henry Payne is called to guard duty. Gates and Summers had a rotating guard duty to protect the storehouse, so the folks couldn't go wandering and get in, and so that invaders couldn't come in. Henry Payne says, no, I'm not going to stand guard. I'm not going to take my turn. And he doesn't. And Strachey writes in his journal, Payne is brought to trial. He writes in his journal remarks that were made. This is a quote from Strachey's journal. Payne replied in such irreverent terms as I should offend the most modest ear to express it in his own phrase, but said he let the governor kiss his dimpled derriere. In the journal, he doesn't give us any words, but he lets us know it was kind of crude. Well, you're on trial for failing to stand guard duty. You're on trial for desertion. You ought to be a little smarter than this. They do find him guilty and sentence him to hang. He says, I'm a gentleman. You don't hang gentlemen, you shoot them. Would you please shoot me? They shot him. He was one of the first people buried on Bermuda. There was a mutiny. They put them on another little island where the living was very, very difficult till they'd learned their lesson. Things weren't all hunky-dory, but they do survive. Now, here's another picture of the Discovery, and give you a little bit of details as they're getting ready to sail out. Deliverance, not Discovery. 40 feet long, 19 feet at the beam. They built a second one, Patience, 29 feet long, 15 feet at the beam. Put them together, that's 69 feet. The Sea Venture was 100 feet long, 35 feet at the beam.